Did you know that 78% of elderly people are eventually seen as a burden by their own families? Some are sent to nursing homes, but Mabel Hartley was left in the forest. She didn't scream. She stood up and walked. Alone in the wilderness, surrounded by silence, she came face to face with something no one had believed was real. A creature over 7 feet tall, covered in dark earth-toned fur. Wounded, feverish, yet still protecting her from a pack of wolves that circled in the night. It never tried to hurt her. It just sat there, watching, shielding her from the cold. Because sometimes, the ones abandoned by the world find each other. This story, inspired by true events, was pieced together from ranger reports and the testimony of a 12-year-old boy named Tanner, who saw the creature long before anyone believed him. And if you stay with us, you'll find out why Mabel refused to be rescued if they shot the creature, what she whispered before saving its life, and how even now she leaves food in the forest, not expecting anything in return. Her son was arrested. At trial, Mabel said only one sentence. "I remember the day he stopped calling me Mom." And the creature, it walked away into the woods, but footprints still appear near her cabin. Now I'd love to know, where are you watching this from? What's your name, dear friend? How far can this story travel? This quiet tale of loyalty, kindness, and the invisible bond between two forgotten souls. If it touched your heart, send it to someone who needs to believe in compassion again. Leave a like, subscribe, and help us build a community of those who believe in Bigfoot, not just as a creature, but as a symbol of something quietly beautiful, still out there. From my forest heart to yours, thank you for being here. The road curved gently, the way it always had. But this time, the car didn't take the turn. Mabel Hartley sat in the passenger seat with her purse clutched neatly in her lap, hands folded over it like she might in church. Her nails, still trimmed and clean, tapped lightly against the fabric. The windows were rolled down just a bit, letting in the dry mountain air of early fall. Air that smelled like dust and pine, like something between memory and forgetting. Her son, Grant, didn't speak much on the drive. That, in itself, wasn't strange. He was never the chatty type, but the silence today had a weight to it, like something unspoken pressing against the glass. "You passed the turn," she said, gently, like she might correct a child who meant no harm. Grant's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel, but he didn't look over. His face, clean-shaven and expressionless, remained forward. "Thought we'd try a different route," he muttered. Scenic. Mabel blinked, slow and steady. Her memory was sharp as ever, no matter what the neighbors whispered. And she knew every road in Lemhi County like she knew her own linen drawer. This wasn't scenic. This was logging road. Old, forgotten, unmarked. She hadn't seen another car for 20 minutes. No signs, no homes, no sound but gravel under tires and wind pushing through the lodge poles. She didn't ask again. The car jolted slightly as it dipped into a rut. The mountains loomed to the west, still wearing the soft haze of late afternoon light. The sky was cloudless, high and empty, like a stage waiting for the next act. Then, without ceremony, the car slowed. They stopped near a wide pull-off where the trees grew in tight and the light thinned. Grant reached into the back seat and pulled up an old duffel bag. Her duffel, she recognized it. The canvas one with the broken zipper from their last church retreat. He set it beside her feet. "You'll stay here," he said, voice clipped. "Someone will come." Mabel didn't move. She looked down at the bag. The zipper had been forced, and not very carefully. Clothes spilled at odd angles. Her spring cardigan, winter socks, a single orthopedic shoe with no pair. The assortment made no sense. Things yanked from drawers, not packed with care. She reached for her coat pocket. It was empty. She reached for her dress pocket. Also empty. "Where's my phone?" she asked, still without panic, but now with precision. Grant opened the driver's side door. "You left it," he said. "Back at home." "No," she answered simply, firmly. "I didn't." He didn't respond. Instead, he placed a single sheet of paper on the dashboard in front of her. It fluttered in the wind from the open door. Her eyes scanned the top. Authorization for long-term care placement. Her name. Date left blank. Signature line untouched. He didn't wait for her to ask questions. He didn't wait for her to get out. He didn't even look at her. Grant Hartley got back in the car, shifted into reverse, and pulled away. Tires crunching over gravel, dust rising behind him like smoke from something burning. She watched until the blur of the car disappeared around the bend. He didn't look back. Not once. She sat there for a while, hands folded again in her lap. The duffel lay at her feet like a stranger's bag. Her legs ached in the cold, and the light had started to thin through the trees, turning everything gold, then gray. Still, she did not cry. There was a dry silence inside her, the kind that didn't leave room for tears. Instead, she bent over and unzipped the bag fully. One glove, a jar of muscle balm, her late husband's battered flashlight, a Tupperware lid with no bottom, as if someone had reached into her life and grabbed at random. Underneath the pile, creased and folded, a yellowed church bulletin. On the back, her handwriting, Psalm 27. Wait for the Lord. She set it aside gently. There was no food, no map, no coat suitable for night in the mountains. But she noticed something else, something smaller. A photograph, bent at the corners. Grant, maybe 6 years old, in overalls, standing beside a wooden porch swing with her husband's old hunting dog. She remembered that day. She remembered the smell of the pie cooling on the window ledge, the sound of laughter, the way her boy had once called her Mama, like it was the only word he trusted. That word was long gone. She folded the photo and placed it in her pocket. Then, slowly, she stood. Her knees popped softly. Her hip ached, but her spine was straight. Behind her, the forest didn't move, but it wasn't empty. She could feel it. Not with fear, not with dread, but with certainty, like the way a church feels full even when no one speaks. There was something in those trees, something old, watching maybe, or simply there. She didn't call out, didn't wave or scream. She looked at the empty road, then at the thick woods, and chose the woods. Each step forward crunched dried needles underfoot. Light filtered in narrow beams, illuminating dust like floating prayers. She kept close to the slope where the trees grew dense but not impassable. Her shoes weren't meant for hiking, but she didn't complain. She never did. That had been her way. Quiet resolve. The kind that came from years of teaching kids how to read in a dusty church basement with flickering lights. Time passed differently in the woods. 10 minutes, maybe 30. The sun dropped behind the ridge. The wind picked up colder now, and still, no birdsong, no deer rustling, no distant highway hum, just her. And whatever was out there. She stopped suddenly, and the sound behind her stopped too. No wind, no branches creaking, just silence so complete it felt like the forest had drawn breath and was holding it. She didn't turn around. Didn't need to. There was no growl, no footfall, no heat of a predator at her back. Only stillness. She tilted her head, the way she used to when listening to children whisper secrets behind her desk. There was a rhythm to silence, and this one had changed. She took one step forward, and behind her, something stepped too, just faintly. She froze. So did it. Then she did something unexpected. She smiled. Not fear, not madness, just something deep inside her that said, I see you. She stepped again. No echo this time. She wasn't alone. But she wasn't being hunted either. The air shifted slightly, as if whatever was near had decided, for the moment, to let her pass. She continued, deeper into the trees. The sky dimmed to navy. A hawk called far off. Maybe an owl. But the path ahead, if it could be called that, seemed to guide itself. The branches gave way just enough. The rocks didn't slip underfoot. And though the cold crept up her arms and into her bones, she walked with something that wasn't quite purpose. but wasn't lost either. She didn't know where she was going, only that this, whatever this was where she was meant to go. And behind her, the forest exhaled again. A woman left on the side of a forgotten road. A bag full of pieces of a life scattered. A car that didn't turn back. And something in the woods that had not yet stepped forward. Not yet, but it was there, watching, waiting, and the silence between them. That silence had just begun to change. The light changed without warning. One moment it was late afternoon, the kind that rests soft on pine needles, amber and loose like it might never leave. The next, it was the kind of dim that didn't come from sunset, but from something else entirely. Something older. The trees had grown thicker. The ground was softer, quieter underfoot. Moss like old velvet. Her shoes sank a little deeper with each step. Mabel didn't know how long she had been walking. Time had taken on the same hazy quality as her breath, present, but slipping. Her purse was still looped around one shoulder, though its weight had become more symbolic than practical. She'd stopped checking the sky, stopped looking back at the road. There wasn't a road anymore, just forest. And that deepening sense of being seen. It wasn't fear, not quite, but it also wasn't comfort. It was attention. That peculiar sensation of being watched without being touched. Like something just at the edge of focus. Like sitting in church and knowing someone 3 pews behind is staring. She paused, and so did it. The sound, whatever had been trailing her, ceased. Not slowed, not faded, stopped. Exactly when she did. She waited. 1 beat, 2. The forest didn't breathe. She turned her head slightly, just enough to listen behind her without fully looking. A trick she'd learned back when she was still working at the library, when you needed to keep an eye on teenagers in the history aisle without scaring them off. Nothing. No footstep, no twig snap, no breath through brush. But it was there. She took another step, then paused again. So did it. It wasn't a trick of sound delay. It wasn't an echo. It was mirroring. Mabel's hand slowly reached for the old flashlight in her bag. She didn't switch it on, just held it, felt its familiar shape against her palm. Cold, metallic, steady. It didn't offer safety, but it reminded her of purpose. Around her, the light dimmed further as the sun slipped behind a ridge she couldn't see. Evening in Idaho came fast in September, especially in valleys this deep. Shadows didn't wait for permission. She stepped forward again. The forest allowed it. The trail, if it was one, grew more defined. Not man-made, but somehow worn, like something had passed here often. Not recent, but frequent. She noticed the shift in scent first. Less of pine and dry earth. More of wet lichen and cedar oil. A richer kind of wild. She walked carefully now. Not slow, not fast. Just deliberate. And then she saw it. A footprint. One. Off the path, near the base of a leaning birch. Pressed deep into the soil. The shape was wrong for a bear. Longer, more defined. Toes visible. Not boot tread, not animal paw. She crouched with effort, knees stiff. Traced the outline with her eyes. Too wide for a human. Too straight. And deep. Too deep for the kind of weight an average man might carry. The heel sunk clean. The front splayed just slightly, like the weight hadn't been rushed, but grounded. Something had stood here, not run. She looked up, eyes scanning the undergrowth. Still nothing. But her breath came shorter now. Not panicked, focused. There was more. Just ahead, partially covered by ferns, another sign. This one vertical. A post. Old. Splintered, worn by weather. Not park service, no paint, no tags, no carvings from sweethearts with pocket knives. But there was a mark, something etched. She leaned closer. 3 angled lines, intersected by a curve. Not English, not any language she knew, not warning, not invitation. And yet, somewhere deep in her memory, or maybe further back than memory, she understood. Not in words, in feeling. This wasn't a place meant for people. Or maybe it was a place that remembered people. and remembered what they had done. She didn't touch the post. She bowed her head slightly, almost without realizing it, like paying respect at a grave you've never visited but always known was there. Then she moved on. The forest grew quieter, but not empty. There was still something. That shadow presence. That silent rhythm just beyond sight. But it had changed. Loosened. As if the moment she acknowledged the boundary, it had shifted its judgment. She walked slower now, not from fatigue, though her hips ached, and her breath came sharp with the cold creeping in, but from a kind of reverence, like she didn't want to startle whatever world she had just walked into. She passed a fallen log, moss-covered, hollow, past a cluster of stones, arranged not naturally, but not with human hands either, balanced in a way that suggested purpose, not coincidence. Everything here seemed to have been placed, not built, placed. She paused again, stood still in the quiet, her hand resting lightly against the smooth bark of a red fir. And behind her, nothing moved, but it was still there, the presence. And now she was sure it wasn't following her. It was keeping pace, not a predator, not a ghost, a sentinel, a question waiting for an answer. And Mabel, standing in the middle of the forest with her old shoes, her aching joints, and her sharp, unapologetic mind, didn't feel small. She felt accounted for, acknowledged. She closed her eyes, just briefly, and whispered a line she hadn't said in years. Not a prayer, exactly. More like a thought she wanted the trees to hear. If I'm still here, I still matter. She opened her eyes. The woods remained. But something inside them had shifted. It wasn't trust, not yet. But it wasn't suspicion anymore either. She stepped forward, and the forest let her pass. And from that point on, it no longer mirrored her movements. It walked with her. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. And the only sound left in the air was the faint hush of pine needles falling, one by one, like a slow rain no one could see. A woman with no map, no destination, no rescue coming. A presence that stayed behind the veil. A language that wasn't written in letters, but in quiet consent, and a forest that had once closed its heart, beginning slowly to open. It had been hours, maybe more. Mabel could feel the ache settling deep into her knees, into her spine, into the soft space between her shoulder blades. The sun had long since fallen behind the western ridge, and now the forest had changed colors entirely. What had once been green and gold now swam in layers of slate blue and quiet black. The night didn't rush in. It crept like breath held too long. She moved slower now, each step careful, every shadow read like a passage from an unfamiliar book. Then she saw the rock shelf, just ahead, jutting from the hillside like a crooked jaw. Above it, the trees cleared slightly, letting down a fragile beam of moonlight. It caught on the rough surface of the stone and turned it silver. But it wasn't the rock that stopped her. It was the silence surrounding it. He was already there. Not a man, not quite a beast. A figure crouched low, broad shoulders hunched, knees bent awkwardly, one leg stretched out in a way that looked wrong. Too still, too stiff. The creature's fur caught the moonlight in dull streaks of dark auburn and ash brown, thick with dust and something darker at the shin. Blood. Even before she moved, she knew. The leg was broken. Not freshly. The wound had had time to fester. The muscle around it twitched occasionally, not from fear, but from the kind of pain that settles into the marrow and waits. It had endured days like this, maybe more. Still, it had not left its post. It watched her. Eyes low, unblinking. Not aggressive, not passive. Simply present. 20 feet of quiet between them. She froze at the edge of the clearing. Every part of her told her to hold still. Not because she was in danger, but because something sacred was unfolding. And you don't barge into sacred things. The wind shifted, cold enough to raise gooseflesh along her neck. Her coat was too thin, her shoes long past dry. But she stayed. So did he. The creature didn't lurch forward. didn't sniff the air or flash teeth. In fact, it turned slightly, its massive frame shifting just enough to pivot one shoulder between her and the wind. Like a barrier, like instinct. But not the kind of instinct that hunts. She blinked. Then again, she wasn't imagining it. This wasn't an ambush. It was a choice. A posture that said, I see you. I see that you are tired. I know what cold does to bone. She lowered herself carefully to a log nearby, the bark damp against her skirt. Her legs sighed in relief. Her hand stayed in her lap. She didn't speak. Not right away. There was no need. She simply looked at him. Not as a monster, not as a miracle, but as someone who had decided not to run. The wound was worse than she'd first thought. Even from where she sat, she could see the split in the skin around the ankle. Dark, swollen, glossy with infection. The fur was matted down with mud and dried blood. No bandage, no splint. Only tension holding it in place. Every few minutes, a muscle deep in the thigh spasmed. But the creature didn't flinch. It was protecting something. She wasn't sure what yet. But she knew one thing. It had been here before she came. Had been suffering long before she wandered into its space. And it hadn't left. Hadn't collapsed. Hadn't called out. It had simply remained. And now so did she. Her voice, when it finally came, was soft and nearly lost in the wind. You're in pain. No answer. Not with words. But the creature's chest rose and fell just slightly deeper, almost like acknowledgement. She shifted, leaned just enough to reach into her coat pocket. A crumpled handkerchief. One piece of hard candy. A torn packet of Tylenol. Long expired. Not much. Nothing that would matter to a wound like that. Still, she placed the handkerchief on the log beside her. A gesture. Not an offering. Not a test. Just presence. Another gust of wind passed through, and she saw the creature turn its face slightly into it. The eyes caught light now, darker than amber, lighter than coal. Worn, not wild. Tired, yes, but not of her. They studied each other a long while, not measuring threat, but possibility. Then, slowly, deliberately, the creature's hand moved. It wasn't a paw, it wasn't claws, it was a hand. Massive, calloused, covered in coarse fur, yes, but unmistakably shaped by the same long-ago mold. It pressed that hand flat against the earth between them, fingers splayed, palm down, like surrender, like declaration, like trust. Mabel didn't move right away. Her breath caught at the sight of it, not from fear, but from the aching familiarity in that simple motion. She had seen that same gesture once before. Long ago, when her husband came home from the war, shaken but whole. He'd sat at the foot of their bed, said nothing, and laid his hand flat on the quilt beside her. I'm here. I'm not what I used to be. But I'm still here. Now, all these years later, in the middle of the forest, another soul did the same. She shifted forward on the log, inch by inch, knees creaking like old church pews. When she was close enough, she knelt, grunting softly, and reached out. Her fingers brushed fur, coarse, warm, damp in places. The creature did not pull back. She placed her palm against his, much smaller, like a child resting her hand in her father's grip. For a moment, they didn't move. Then she saw it. Scars. Not just the fresh wound, but older ones, along the wrist. Thin, shiny lines wrapped around in a pattern. Not bite marks. Not thorns. Rope. Too symmetrical to be anything else. Her eyes lifted to his, but he had already looked away. Not in shame, but in refusal to relive. He hadn't brought her here to show pain. She had simply stumbled into it. And now, they shared it. Mabel exhaled slowly, sitting back again. The creature shifted as well, lowering himself further, the bad leg trembling under the weight, but refusing to collapse. They stayed like that. Two shapes framed by trees. Two lives wrapped in silence. One who had been discarded, and one who had been left behind. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steadier. I won't tell anyone, she said. It wasn't a promise, it was a decision. A choice to carry this moment like a secret kept safe in a book's spine. Tucked away, never lost. The creature didn't respond, didn't need to. A single breeze stirred the needles above them, and for the first time all day, it felt like the forest exhaled. Not in warning, in permission. By dawn, the clearing would still be there, but something in both of them would have shifted. Not healed, but seen. The cold came first, not the sharp kind that bites all at once, but the quiet kind that seeps in slowly, patient, like it has all the time in the world. Mabel felt it in her hands before anything else. Her fingers stiffened, the joints growing thick and uncooperative. Then her feet, numb inside shoes never meant for nights like this. The air sank deeper into her lungs, each breath thinner than the last, as if the forest itself were drawing warmth away, inch by inch. Night had settled fully now. No trace of the sky's earlier blue, just black layered over black, broken only by moonlight slipping through the canopy in narrow, uncertain stripes. Somewhere far off, water moved. Maybe a creek, maybe nothing more than memory playing tricks on tired ears. She sat on the ground near the rock shelf, her back resting against stone that still held a hint of the day's warmth. Her breath came shallow, controlled. She knew the signs. She had lived long enough to recognize them in herself the way she once recognized them in others. Cold confusion, shivering that wouldn't stop, the dangerous quiet that follows. The creature was still there. He had shifted since the last light faded, drawn himself closer to the rock, angling his massive body so the wind hit his back instead of hers. His injured leg lay stretched awkwardly to the side, unmoving, the swollen flesh dark against the ground. Every now and then, a tremor passed through him. Not weakness, but restraint. Pain held down by will alone. Mabel noticed how his breathing changed when the temperature dropped. Slower, deeper, measured, as if he were counting each breath, deciding which ones were worth taking. She hugged her arms around herself, teeth chattering despite her effort to stop it. Her thoughts began to thin, drifting toward memories she hadn't touched in years. Her husband's coat hanging by the door, the smell of coffee early in the morning, the sound of Grant's footsteps when he was still a boy, running through the house without worrying who might leave. She blinked hard and forced herself back. Stay present. The forest shifted. At first, it was subtle, a hush that felt heavier than silence. Then a sound, low, distant, almost swallowed by the trees. A howl, long, measured, not a cry, not a challenge. An announcement. Mabel's spine straightened despite the cold. She knew that sound. Everyone in Idaho did. It wasn't fear that rose in her chest. It was understanding. Wolves didn't howl without reason. They didn't waste energy. Another howl answered, closer this time. Then another. They were circling. The creature reacted instantly. He pushed himself upright with a sharp, controlled movement that would have sent most beings screaming. His injured leg dragged, useless, but he ignored it. His shoulders squared, his head lifted. He turned, positioning himself directly between Mabel and the dark beyond the trees. The wolves emerged like shadows pulling free from the night. First one shape, then another. Gray coats blending perfectly with stone and bark. Eyes catching faint light. Noses lifting, testing the air. They smelled blood. They smelled weakness. They smelled opportunity. But they did not rush. They stopped at the edge of the clearing, bodies low, tails still. Not afraid. Calculating. Reading the scene the way hunters always do. The creature stood his ground. He didn't bare his teeth, didn't charge, didn't make himself bigger than he already was. Instead, he did something else. He planted his good foot firmly into the earth, pressed his injured leg back just enough to brace himself. Then he let out a sound Mabel had never heard before. It wasn't a roar. It wasn't a scream. It was low, deep, vibrating through the ground more than the air. A sound that didn't say come closer or run. It said this place is taken. The wolves froze. Mabel felt the vibration in her chest, in her ribs, in the stone behind her. It wasn't meant for her. It wasn't meant to scare. It was communication, old, precise, the kind that existed long before words. One of the wolves stepped forward. Just one, testing, curious. The creature didn't move. He simply shifted his weight again, angling his body so there was no doubt what he was protecting. His massive frame blocked Mabel entirely now. She could see only the edge of his fur, the rise and fall of his back, the steady way he refused to yield. The lead wolf lowered its head, ears twitching. Not aggression, assessment. Then slowly, the pack began to step back. Not in panic, not in defeat. In respect, they understood boundaries. Wolves always had. They knew when a fight wasn't about hunger, but about something deeper. Territory didn't always belong to the strongest. Sometimes it belonged to the one who chose to stand. One by one, the shapes faded back into the trees. The last pair of eyes lingered for a moment, reflecting moonlight like dying embers. Then they were gone. The forest released its breath. Mabel hadn't realized she was holding hers until it left her in a long, trembling exhale. Her body shook harder now, the cold reclaiming what the tension had masked. Her vision blurred slightly at the edges. "I'm still here," she whispered. The words came out rough, fragile, but they were true. The creature turned just enough to look at her. In the dim light, his eyes softened. Not with relief, but with something else. Confirmation. As if he had made a decision earlier, and this moment had simply affirmed it. He lowered himself carefully, slowly, back into a crouch. The injured leg gave a slight, involuntary jerk, but he absorbed it without sound. Then, once he was steady, he leaned closer, not touching, but close enough that his body heat reached her. Warmth spread across her shoulders, faint, real. She let herself lean into it, just slightly, her head resting against the rock as her body fought to hold on. She thought of the people she had once sat with in hospital rooms, the way sometimes all you could do was stay, not fix, not save, just remain present long enough for the night to pass. The forest grew quiet again, not empty, never empty, but balanced. Above them, the moon drifted higher, pale and indifferent. The trees whispered among themselves. Somewhere, an owl called, reclaiming the dark. Mabel's shivering slowed. Her thoughts steadied. Beside her, the creature remained awake. Alert, listening, guarding. He did not sleep. He chose to keep watch. And in that choice, pain and all, something settled between them. An understanding without names. A bond formed not by touch or promise, but by the simple refusal to abandon one another when the night tested them both. The cold still lingered. Dawn was hours away. And nothing about this place had become safe. But it had become shared, and that was enough. For now, the forest had held its breath, and somewhere deep within it, something ancient had decided to let them live through the night. Not because it had to, but because it wanted to. The morning came late. The sun, when it finally broke through the trees, felt reluctant, like it wasn't sure if it was welcome in the place where the night had held so tight. The forest remained still. The kind of stillness that doesn't mean peace, but waiting. Mabel's eyelids fluttered open. Her body ached in a way it hadn't in years. Not just her joints or her back, but something deeper. Like her spirit had walked too far from itself and was only now catching up. Her head rested against the rock, her breath visible in the cool light. She wasn't dead. That was the first thought. And strangely, she wasn't afraid. He was still there. The creature, him. She didn't know what to call him anymore, not out loud anyway. But she knew he had stayed. Through the dark, through the cold, through the circling wolves. He hadn't left her alone, not even once. He sat nearby, half hidden in the shadow of the trees, his broad back turned slightly toward her. He wasn't asleep. He was listening. His ears twitched with each shift of the wind. But his posture had changed. something softer in the line of his spine, something less guarded. Mabel shifted, slowly, her bones protesting, her hands stiff. Her body had lost heat overnight. She could feel it in her fingers, her toes, the dull fog at the edge of her mind. But none of that mattered. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out what little she had. Half a torn flannel scarf, faded blue, from years back when she used to keep it in the church kitchen for cold days. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. She didn't know what she was doing exactly, but she knew it mattered. He turned to her then. No sudden movement, just a glance, eyes deep and still. She nodded. Not a question, not a request. Just acknowledgement. Then she dragged herself forward, hands and knees. The forest floor damp, bits of bark sticking to her palms, her knees pressing against roots and rocks. But she didn't stop. She stopped only when she was close enough to feel the warmth of him again, rising off his massive frame like a quiet fire. Her breath caught, the smell of him. Earth, wood smoke, and something like wet stone washed over her. Then she reached out. Her hand hovered inches from his arm. Fur thick, coarse. She had never touched anything like it. Not even on the old dogs from the farm she'd grown up on. This wasn't animal fur. It was something in between, dense but layered, textured like it knew what weather was coming before it arrived. He didn't flinch, not when she touched him, not even when her fingers brushed over the bruised muscle near the wound. He simply exhaled, not a sigh, not a warning, a release, as if he'd been holding his breath since she arrived. Her hand moved gently, not to pet, not to comfort, but to see, to know. Then she found the wound again. It was angry now. The swelling had deepened. The skin beneath was red, taut. She didn't have much. No medical kit, no clean water, not even aspirin that hadn't expired years ago. But she had what she always carried. The old instincts of care. She tore the scarf. She wrapped it tight. She used the heat of her hands to press it down. He still didn't pull away. When she looked up, she saw his face clearly in the morning light for the first time. Not beast, not myth. There was weariness there. And pain. Yes. But something else. A kind of patience she had never seen on any human. Not even the ones who'd spent decades sitting in pews trying to earn grace. He looked at her the way people look at someone who just did something kind that they didn't expect, like it hurt to receive it. And then he did something she didn't expect. He moved his hand toward hers, slowly, deliberately, and placed it, palm down, beside hers in the dirt. She glanced down and noticed more than size. Scars. Across his wrist, old ones. Not jagged like claw marks. Straight, circular, patterned. The kind you don't get from falling. The kind someone puts there on purpose. She didn't ask. She didn't need to. Pain has its own language. She had seen enough wrists in her life to know the difference between accident and captivity. This one had been tied, repeatedly, not to bind for care, but to trap. And yet, he was here, free, somehow, alive, still choosing gentleness. She rested her hand lightly over his scarred wrist, not to erase anything, but to tell him without words, I see it, and I'll carry it too. They sat like that for a long time. The forest around them waking up, birds returning, wind moving slower, the kind of quiet that isn't empty but full of breath and waiting. Then he shifted his weight again, and without rising, without fanfare, he leaned just enough so that the edge of his shoulder barely touched hers. Not in weakness, not in fear, in solidarity, a gesture without pride or shame, just presence. And in that touch, something opened between them. Not a doorway, not a bridge. Something older. A mutual knowing. Two creatures, long abandoned in different ways, now sat side by side. Not talking, not healing, just existing, together. She looked up at the canopy above. The light was breaking stronger now, pushing through the trees in long streaks of gold. Dust floated like tiny spirits in the air. Somewhere, water moved again, closer this time. The earth beneath her no longer felt like a place to survive. It felt like a place she'd been allowed into. She closed her eyes. Not to sleep. To rest in what was finally safe. The kind of safety that doesn't come from walls or locked doors, but from the knowledge that something had chosen not to harm you, even when it could have. When she opened her eyes again, the birds had grown louder, and so had the sound of water. He shifted beside her, head tilting toward the sound. Then, for the first time, he stood, slowly, with difficulty. His leg trembled, but held. He didn't look at her as he rose, not out of dismissal, but out of instinct, like someone returning to their task. And she knew. He had led her near because she had stayed. But now he had something else to do. He took a few steps forward, paused, turned slightly, just enough that she could see the side of his face again, and waited, not calling her, not leading her, just leaving the path open if she wanted to follow. She stood too, shaky, sore, but sure, and without a word between them, they moved forward, one step at a time, one pain beside another, both carrying the quiet kind of strength that doesn't ask to be seen. They walked deeper into the forest, but not into danger, not into mystery, into something older than either of them, something built out of mutual survival and silence. And every step left behind more than just footprints. It left behind the idea that monsters can only hurt. Because sometimes, the ones called monsters are the only ones who remember what it means not to. Some stories don't begin when we think they do. They start weeks earlier, in moments that feel small. A boy watching something move between trees. A sound heard but not spoken of. A question left unasked at the breakfast table. Most people don't notice, but some do. Tanner Reed was 12 years old and already better at keeping secrets than most men twice his age. He sat high on the wooden ladder stand his father had hammered into a pine 3 seasons back. From up there, the forest looked quieter than it really was. You could see the shape of the land better, how the slopes dipped and rose, how the light shifted depending on the angle of the sky. It was early September, the air dry and cool, and the ridge across from him had begun turning color. Leaves rustling like whispers between old friends. He wasn't hunting. Not really. His dad thought he was. Sent him out early with an old thermos, half filled with watered-down cocoa, and instructions about keeping watch for elk or tracks or trespassers. The usual. But Tanner had learned a long time ago that if he didn't say much, adults just assumed he agreed. So he nodded, took the thermos, and climbed the stand. And from there, he waited. Because something had been coming through that patch of forest. Something big, something smart, not a bear. He knew bear, knew the way they moved, knew the stink of them. This was different. No smell, no sound, just motion, intentional. Like it knew where every branch was before it stepped. The first time he saw it 3 weeks ago, he thought it was just a shadow. Then it reached down and opened a steel jaw trap. Not with fear, not with hesitation. It bent slowly. Those massive hands working the rusted spring like a mechanic with muscle memory. And then, once it had freed the leg of the young doe caught inside, it simply watched her limp off into the brush. Tanner had stared from his perch, heart pounding, fingers numb around the edges of his thermos. It didn't see him, or maybe it did, and just didn't care. That changed everything. He never told his father. Not once. Not even when the man came home drunk one night, grumbling about a dozen traps sprung without catching a thing. Too clean, he'd said. Ain't no wolf that tidy. Then he poured himself another shot and muttered something about kids messing around. Tanner had stayed quiet, because it wasn't a kid, and it wasn't messing around. From that day on, he started leaving water. Small bottles, sometimes fruit. He didn't know if it was the right thing to do, but it felt less wrong than doing nothing. He would set them near the edge of the logging road, just off the tire tracks where the grass grew taller. Sometimes the bottle would be gone. Sometimes it wouldn't. But the next time he saw it, it looked at him. Not a stare, not a threat, just acknowledgement, as if to say, you know, and you haven't run. This morning, Tanner had seen something else. A car, familiar, older, silver-gray sedan with a cracked back window, parked crooked along the edge of the old service road near mile marker 14. He knew that car. Belonged to a man named Grant Hartley. Came into the general store every few weeks. Bought batteries and cough drops. The kind of man who always avoided eye contact. But it wasn't Grant that caught his attention. It was the duffel bag lying beside the road. Torn open. Clothes scattered like someone had been dropped, not dropped off. Tanner stood beside his bike and stared. Then he looked at the woods. He knew where the creature stayed. Not the exact spot, but close enough. He knew how to listen. How to tell when the birds got quiet, when the deer tracks vanished, when the air felt too still for the time of day. He pushed his bike into the brush and hid it under a mess of branches. Then he followed the signs, and when he found the edge of the ridge, when he crouched behind a thicket and saw the clearing just beyond, his breath caught, because she was still alive. The woman, older, pale face, hair tucked under a knit cap, sitting beside the creature like she'd been there forever, her hands resting on her lap, her eyes closed like she trusted the silence more than the noise. And the creature, he wasn't guarding her. He was staying with her, not because he had to, but because he chose to. Tanner felt the back of his throat tighten, not from fear, from something else, a feeling he didn't have a name for yet. He watched them for a while longer, then crept back through the woods, every step careful. He knew what he had to do, not for him, for her, for both of them. By early afternoon, he'd reached the ranger station just outside North Fork. He didn't ask for his dad, didn't ask for Sheriff Clyde. He found Ranger Lorna Brewster, who'd once stitched his leg when he split it on barbed wire and hadn't told his father. She didn't ask him why his face was pale, or why he was out of breath, or why he looked like he'd aged 5 years since morning. She just said, "Talk slow, Tanner." And he did. Every word. No lies. Just the truth. As quiet and strange as it was. He told her about the car, about the woman, about the creature. She didn't laugh. She didn't interrupt. She listened, and by sunset, she and 2 other rangers were loading gear into the helicopter. Tanner stood by the window of the station, watching them work, fingers still shaking slightly. Not from cold, from knowing. Because for the first time in his life, someone had looked at him and believed. Not because he had proof, because he had eyes that saw clearly. He turned away from the window and walked back into the main room, where Lorna was reviewing maps. She looked up and gave him a small nod, the kind that said, "You did good, kid," without needing to say it out loud. Tanner sat down in the corner, didn't ask what would happen next. He knew whatever it was, it would come fast, and it would change everything. But maybe, just maybe, it would save someone too. Not all witnesses are grown. Not all rescuers carry badges. Sometimes the person who notices first is the one the world expects to stay quiet. And sometimes silence is the first language of trust. They came from the sky. Not like thunder, not like war, but close enough. The sound of rotor blades tore through the treetops like a buzzsaw through old hymns, scattering birds, shaking leaves loose, stirring the silence that had held firm for days. The morning was barely awake when the chopper passed over the western ridge, banking left, dipping low, its shadow cutting across the creek and over the glade where Mabel Hartley stood. One hand pressed lightly against the trunk of a cedar, the other shielding her eyes from the rising wind. She didn't flinch, but the one beside her did. The creature dropped low, not from fear, but calculation. His ears twitched, body pulled tight like a coiled rope. The old wound in his leg pulsed red beneath the makeshift bandage she'd retied at dawn. His breath quickened, then steadied again. He was watching the sky, watching the thing that didn't belong here, and he already knew what it meant. Mabel lowered her hand. Her voice, when it came, was quiet, nearly swept away by the wind. "They're here for me." He didn't look at her, didn't move, but something in the set of his jaw shifted. A question, unspoken. Or maybe not a question, just a truth neither of them had dared to say out loud. The time they had been living in, that strange pocket of shared breath and trust, was breaking. Time was folding back into the world. She stepped closer to him, her fingers brushing his elbow. "I didn't ask them to come," she said. "But I think a boy did." The creature blinked once, as if he already knew. He moved before she did, fast for his size, despite the leg. He pulled her gently, firmly, toward the thicker part of the woods. Not far, just enough to cloak them from the direct path of the noise. The trees swallowed them again. Shadows wrapped around their shoulders like old coats. And then the voices came, distant at first, then louder. Radios crackling, branches breaking, human footsteps, stumbling, urgent, methodical. Mabel could make out 3, maybe 4. One voice belonged to a woman. She had the kind of tone used to giving orders without raising pitch, calm in crisis. One voice was younger, nervous, kept repeating, "That's not a bear. I told you, that's not a bear." Then came the dogs, barking sharp and high. Not hunting dogs, search dogs, the kind trained to find bodies. Mabel stepped away from the creature then. Only a little, just enough to be seen, to be found. Her knees buckled the moment she cleared the trees. Not from pain, from knowing. She dropped to the ground, palms flat in the dirt, heart pounding. Not from fear, but from the ache of what was about to be undone. The voice that found her first belonged to the ranger. Ma'am, stay right there. We've got you." Footsteps, hands, flashlights. Warm cloth draped over her shoulders. A water bottle opened, pressed into her hand. They asked questions. She answered few. She pointed toward the trees and whispered, "He's still hurt." They looked at her like she'd said too much, or not enough. The younger voice, the boy's, broke through again. "Don't shoot him! Please, you can't shoot him!" Another voice, older, firmer. "Son, step back." Mabel raised her hand weakly. "Don't point your weapons. He hasn't harmed me, not once." "Ma'am, you've been through a lot. Let's get you out first." "I'm not leaving if you bring a gun near him." That stopped them, all of them. The ranger crouched beside her, looking her in the eye now. "You understand this situation is highly unusual." Mabel nodded. "You're saying there's someone out there, someone not human?" She looked past the woman, toward the clearing, where the light had softened again. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, "I'm saying, if you aim a weapon at him, I'll stand in the way." They hesitated. She stood, and she walked, without waiting for permission, back toward the trees. And he was still there, still crouched, still watching, his breath slower now. But his eyes locked onto hers, steady and alert. He could have run. He could have vanished into that green so deep no man would ever find him again. But he didn't. He stood. He limped forward. And then, he did something none of them expected. He knelt, one knee to the ground, one arm resting across his raised thigh. The other hand, massive, dark, worn, pressed flat against the forest floor. An ancient posture. Not surrender, not defeat. Just stop. The search team froze. No one moved. No one raised a weapon. Even the dogs fell quiet. Because something in that posture said, "You're not the only ones who understand this place has rules." Mabel stepped between them slowly. And she turned, faced the rangers, faced the boy, Tanner, who stood with fists clenched at his sides, faced the moment. "No guns," she said again. They lowered them. Not because of protocol, but because something in the air told them if they didn't, they'd lose more than a witness. They'd lose whatever made this forest sacred. The creature rose, took 2 steps back, and turned, without sound, without looking over his shoulder. He walked back into the trees. The light caught him once, just long enough to frame him in gold. Then he was gone. Mabel stood very still. Tanner stepped beside her, and for a while neither of them said a word. The rescue was real. But the story? It would never fit inside the report. Not every rescue ends with applause. Not every hero needs a name. Some disappear the moment the world remembers itself again. But that doesn't mean they're lost. The trial didn't take long. Small towns remember. And North Fork remembered everything. Every grocery trip, every Sunday absence, every soft denial spoken by a man who used to be a boy raised by someone better. Grant Hartley sat in his gray suit that didn't fit quite right, flinching under fluorescent lights in a courtroom built more for land disputes than betrayal. Mabel Hartley walked in slowly, not out of weakness but resolve. Her cane clicked once on the linoleum before she folded it away and took her place in the witness box. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She just told the truth the way older women do when they have nothing left to lose and nothing left to prove. Calm, clear, measured. Yes, she remembered the road. Yes, she remembered the bag. Yes, she remembered how her own son wouldn't meet her eyes. And when the defense suggested confusion, hinted at age, at possible signs of senility, Mabel only leaned forward a little and said, "I remember the day he stopped calling me Mom." The courtroom fell still. Even the old bailiff near the door shifted in his seat like something sharp had cut through the air. Grant blinked, once, twice, but didn't look at her. And the jury, 12 people who'd driven past her porch for decades, who'd borrowed hymnals from her church cart, who'd seen her carry groceries through snowdrifts without asking for help, deliberated for less than 20 minutes. Guilty of abandonment, guilty of fraud, guilty of breaking something that used to be sacred. They sentenced him lightly. Mabel didn't ask for anything more, because punishment wasn't the point. Truth was, after the trial they offered her options. Nice homes closer to town, assisted care, meals delivered to her door, television and bingo Tuesdays. She thanked them all and said no. 3 weeks later, she moved into a small cabin on the edge of Salmon Chalice National Forest. It had a single bedroom, a gas stove, and a crooked front porch that creaked in the wind like it was remembering something too. The locals shook their heads. She should be with people. She's still not right in the head. She's not scared after all that? But Mabel never paid them any mind. She grew tomatoes in old wash tubs, read by lamplight, walked every morning before the sun dried the dew. And at night, she stood on her porch beneath the sagging roofline, wrapped in her late husband's coat, breathing deep the smell of pine and bark and memory. Sometimes she lit a candle, not for prayer, just to show she was still there. The forest didn't answer, not right away, and she didn't expect it to. But sometimes, footprints appeared, large ones, too wide, too spaced to be a man's. They never led up to the cabin, never crossed her threshold, but they were close enough to see, and then gone. Sometimes her water barrel filled faster than rain could explain. Sometimes a dead branch leaning too close to the roof would be moved by morning. Sometimes, on cold nights, she found fresh pine boughs laid near her steps, green and full, as if left for insulation or ritual. She never touched them, just nodded once and let them be. One afternoon she found a stone on her porch, flat, smooth, carved. A symbol etched into its face, 3 curved lines, intersected, familiar. She didn't try to understand it. Understanding wasn't required. That night she stood on the porch again, wind pushing her scarf sideways, hair pulled loose around her cheeks. She looked toward the dark between the trees and lifted her hand. Not a wave, not a summons, just a gesture. A presence. Her fingers held in the air a moment longer than needed. And she whispered, not expecting anything in return, "I'm still here." Some nights she heard the sound again, that deep, low-throated hum, the kind that rose from the bones of the earth. Not angry, not lost, just ancient, just watching. And she would sit on her porch in silence, not lonely anymore, not waiting, but part of something older than disappointment. The boy Tanner visited sometimes. He didn't talk much, just helped her stack wood or fix the screen door when the hinges rusted. He brought her a new kettle once, said he found it at a yard sale in town. She knew he bought it with his own allowance. She thanked him, then made him cocoa, and they sat under the overhang as a light snow fell. He never asked about the creature. She never told him stories. But one time he left a water bottle at the foot of her steps. She didn't move it. Next morning it was gone. Years passed that way. Quiet, undisturbed. A life lived small, but not unseen, and the forest remained. Sometimes she saw other people in town whispering about prints found near hunting blinds. A hunter's truck door bent backward like it had been pulled by something with fingers. A ranger's dog that refused to go near a certain trail. She didn't comment, didn't correct, because not everything sacred has to be explained. And not everyone who's left behind is lost. In the winter of her 73rd year, after a windstorm dropped 2 trees behind her cabin, Mabel found a new trail through the woods. Narrow, tucked behind rocks she hadn't seen before. She followed it a ways, just a short walk, and saw, far off in the distance, a high ridge she'd never climbed. On it, a figure, still, tall. Too far to see clearly, but it stood just long enough for her to know. Then it turned and vanished. She smiled. That night she lit her candle again, let it burn till dawn. She didn't need a photograph, didn't need to explain it to anyone, because what she'd found in those woods didn't need proving. It had changed her in ways no courtroom ever could, and she knew, with the kind of knowing that comes not from evidence but from shared breath, that she had been seen, heard, remembered, maybe even forgiven. Some stories don't end. They drift into the quiet, into the hills, into the trees that outlive everyone. Some stories don't need to be believed by all, just by the ones who remain. Of all the things that disappear in this world, names, footprints, old roads that fade back into forest, somehow, the quietest acts of kindness are the ones that last longest. Because sometimes, it isn't the loudest battles that change us. It's not the ones with witnesses or medals or headlines. It's the ones that happen far from sight, where no one is watching, and still, someone chooses compassion. There are places in this world where language runs out, where pain doesn't have words and healing doesn't need them, where survival isn't about being stronger, louder, or faster, but about being willing to see another living soul and not turn away. And in those places, deep in the woods, deep in ourselves, we're reminded that not every bond needs a name, and not every answer needs to be spoken aloud. Because there are connections too sacred for language. There are choices too beautiful for applause. And there are lives that quietly shift the entire course of another's, simply by staying when they could have left. This story was never about monsters. It was about the things we call monstrous because we don't understand them, and the people we cast aside for the very same reason. But in the end, it asks us one simple thing. When you are watched by something older than time, something that sees not just your face, but your fear, your failures, and still chooses to protect you, what kind of person do you become after that? We don't always get to repay what saves us. Sometimes we only get to carry the lesson forward, to live more gently, to speak more truthfully, to listen more deeply, and to remember. Just because something disappears into the trees doesn't mean it's gone. Some presences never leave. They become part of the wind, part of the silence between leaves, part of the reason we look up at night and feel less alone than we did before. If this story found you in a moment you needed it, if it made you feel seen, or simply reminded you that gentleness still matters, please let us know. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, or just say, "I'm still here." Sometimes that's more than enough. And if this quiet journey moved you, please consider subscribing and joining our little corner of the world, where stories still believe in kindness and in the invisible ties that hold us together across the miles, the silence, and the years. Thank you for listening. We're honored to share these moments with you.